there in Zoom land. Hello, welcome as well. Before we move on too much, obviously some housekeeping stuff. You guys have to use the washroom or whatever. You don't have to put your hand up or anything like that. I know that the real estate agents have to be on their phone, so if a call comes in, by all means, feel free to grab whatever you have to do. Oh, to all our folks out in the Zoom world, feel free to just ask a question. You can interrupt me. I don't mind that at all. Sure that we're keeping everybody going on at the same pace. Everybody's understanding is the same. And so yeah, today, so Jessica, I contacted Jessica a while ago to get in to just do something with the team, and we hadn't really figured out anything. And then a couple weeks back ago, she realized I was on the Karst network of radon instructors, radon measurers, I should say. So she asked me to come in and see if we would just do some radon. In particular, the way I want to approach this today is to do radon and how it kind of integrates with the real estate world and the real estate agent, because there are some challenges when it comes when some testing and radon and everybody's time frames and all that wonderful. Well, our agenda today is pretty easy. It's going to be, I don't know, maybe 45-minute little talk here. And then we can certainly open things up to questions that either our Zoom people have or you folks have here in the class. For you folks that are in the class, there's coffee and donuts over there. Please help yourself. And cards are over there as well if you want to grab my contact. Well, the way the day will roll out is I'm going to do an introduction. I want to get into some very basic science on radon with all radiological stuff. It's very easy to go down a wormhole and get caught up in the atomic physics and the nuclear physics and all that stuff. And we're going to stay away from that. But we do have to talk a little bit about it because kind of rolls into the health effects. If you understand what, for instance, radiological decay means, you'll understand what happens when it gets into our lungs. So we'll touch on that stuff. Won't go too deep, I promise you. We're obviously going to address where is radon found. We are a bit of a hotbed here in across Canada. Really, Nova Scotia is a relatively high radon area. We'll talk about some statistics there. Is radon bad? I'm going to tell you that radon is not bad. So stew on that as we're going through the presentation, and you'll see what I mean when I say radon is not bad. Get into some measuring and mitigation, and that's a big part of the real estate world. Maybe not so much the mitigation from my standpoint, but how do we get in and measure a place within the time frame of a real estate transaction? How do we make that test legitimate so that A, we're not opening ourselves up to liability or potentially a real estate agent up to liability, and also how are we, more importantly probably than everything, is how are we best servicing the buyer?
In the scope of that, about testing within a real estate transaction.
Yes.
This is just something I was reading the other day. Is it true? We're going to talk about that because true radon testing could take 30 days.
True radon is a year. Health Canada stipulates that for me to walk into a home, and we'll definitely get this in a bit, but for me to walk into a home tested and definitively tell the home buyer, homeowner, that they need or do not need a radon mitigation system, I have to do at least a 91-day test. Preferably, I do a year test. Obviously, from a real estate standpoint, that doesn't work. And that doesn't work for me as a home inspector, a radon tester. Drop a $1,500 machine off in your house for 91 days. Just so we Karst, which stands for the Canadian Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists, sort of developed and sanctions a radon test for the real estate market, which we'll cover. But yes, that is absolutely correct. And then, of course, the measuring the mitigation, we're going to tie that into radon and real estate. And then finally, at the end of the day, we'll just have a little bit of questions, or once again, you can ask me questions throughout the course. I don't mind as well. So probably somewhere about 45 minutes this is going to take, and then I can stay here all morning if people are asking me questions, not a problem. Oh, who am I? Well, once again, I'm Ed Oakley. I'm the owner operator of Home Scope Inspections. We directly do home inspections and radon measurement the local HRM area, but also we'll go out to where we're needed within reason. And that always depends on the travel allowance and the money that's we're talking about to come out and do a place that's remote. Typically from about, if you take about the center of Halifax, you go out about 150 kilometers, something like that. That's kind of the area we'll service without any need for extra cost or anything like that. So yeah, and I also have, so although we physically do radon testing and home inspections, I also have wonderful relationships, wet inspectors and sewer scopes and all of those wonderful guys and girls that I can call on a whim. So I always like to sort of market my business as being a one-stop shop. If a agent needs something done and they don't want to, they've got a bunch of stuff to do through the day and they just want to make that one phone call and schedule 3 things that they need, then they can simply call me. We'll do that for you, even if it's not something I would have a financial incentive to do. It's just a way of me servicing the real estate agents and HRM. Oh, that would double click on me. So I've been in construction for how this whole thing started with me doing home inspections was. I started construction about 30 years ago, and they've done everything from general contractor, full house builds, to doing small renovations, to remediation, mitigation for fires and floods and all that wonderful stuff. I've just always, through that experience, I've always sort of enjoyed the inspection part of things, going in and framing house, making sure the frame well. And I've always had a bit of an eye, I think, for seeing things that maybe some people don't see in homes, and that kind of led me into this field. I've recently retired as of about a month ago from the Halifax Fire Department. It's 32 years there. And I worked a big part of my career as a hazardous materials technician. Well, that has given me a relatively good background in radiology, which fits well with radon testing and with what we're going to talk about today. Once again, I'm not going to get too crazy deep on that. So yeah, and of course, when you're a firefighter in the fire service, building construction is critical to you to know. So I've had lots of training through the fire service about building construction, collapse potential, rot, decomposition of wood and structural materials. And then I also put on a lot of training as my seniority grew in the fire service and I became a captain. I also ended up putting on a lot of construction training for new employees coming on the job. So pretty good background in construction and pretty good background in radon as well. I'm a certified professional home inspector, so I think we probably know here that in Nova Scotia there is no regulation on home inspectors. Anybody could start a home inspection business right now with zero training. However, I want it to be a little bit more formal than that. So I'm a certified professional home inspector, once again, through Carson Dunlop. That's one of the main home inspection training companies, I guess you could say, in Canada. I'm a member of the Canadian Association of Home and Property Inspectors, or CAPI. You'll hear that name probably once in a while through your travels. I'm also nationally certified radon tester. So that certification, that training comes through an organization that joined together. That's CARST, which is the Canadian Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists. CNRPP, which is the Canadian National Radon Proficiency Program. So that is, CARST is the organization that kind of guides Health Canada on specific things all related to radon. CARST develops the criteria, the numbers, the formats, the math that we go by to determine radon, and then CNRPP takes that information from CARST and builds the training program we follow. Okay, so get into some basic science, okay? Basic radon or radiological science. So back in the days when you were in physics class in high school, stoned out of your mind, thinking you're never going to have to learn this stuff again, you're going to have to learn it again right now. So what is radon? Well, in a nutshell, radon is just radioactive gas. It ultimately comes from decomposition or the decaying of uranium. So, we've all heard of uranium, plutonium, and thorium, and all these radioactive elements. Well, uranium is kind of the start of the radon gas problem for us. So, a little bit of radiology or radioactive science. We have a radioactive element such as uranium. You look at the molecule with its nucleus and its orbit. That nucleus and orbit is really unstable. It's in a very chaotic state. Doesn't want to exist in that state. Uranium wants to eventually become a stable, balanced sort of element. Okay, so all radioactive isotopes, radioactive molecules exist in this real sort of chaotic state. Don't like being in that state. Want to get to a more balanced state. So uranium, for instance, as an example, will eventually over time, K, or we also will call it disintegrate, will disintegrate into lead. It'll take about 14 billion years. So fear not, if you have uranium around your house, it'll eventually go away for you, okay? So I talk about this. So what happens is uranium, which of course is found in the upper crust of the earth, is our beginning of the problem for radon gas. So as uranium decays, goes through a bunch of different phases. If we look at uranium and we call uranium parent, parent is going to give birth progeny. Okay? So you guys, if you have children, you have created progeny down the line. You are the parent, correct? So if uranium is the parent, as the uranium decays, it begins to produce progeny. We call those progeny daughters. Uranium decays, it produces daughters. One of those daughters that it ultimately produces, it's decaying down the chain, is radon. Okay? And the problem with radon is it's kind of the first phase in which now its radiological substance has gone into a gas phase. Because if it would have just stayed as a solid within the ground, minding its own business problem, it wouldn't really have that effect on us. Now it is turned into a gas where it now can be released into the atmosphere where we are exposed to it. Okay, so uranium is found in rock and soil, and it's going to be pretty much everywhere we are walking. We are going to be in connection with soil or rock that some infusion of uranium, some places a lot higher than others. So radioactive gas, radon is a radioactive gas. It's tasteless, odorless, it's invisible. There's no way you can tell by your senses that you're into a place with radon. This will become a little bit more pertinent down the line here as we go through our course here. It is 7 times heavier than air, so it wants to kind of settle. What happens within a home is we generally create negative pressure within our homes. There's something called the stack effect. So even though the radon was left sort of unbothered, it would tend to want to settle. Our homes, our exhaust systems, and our our range hoods and our dryers and all that stuff creates an environment where the radon can leave the lower parts of the home and come up through the entire structure. Left alone, it will settle. And you'll see why that's a little bit important here. Yeah. This is another important one we'll talk about in a second. It's chemically inert. So it's not electrostatically charged. It doesn't react with other chemicals. Doesn't stick. It's just a very sort of a chemically inert gas, and you'll see why that's important. Second. So, it's our science. Any questions there? So once again, just to clarify that so we don't get too messed up. Uranium. Uranium begins to change its phases over time. One of those phases is radon gas. The uranium itself is not our problem. It starts the problem. It eventually turns into radon gas, which gets up into our home. And that is how we start to have health effects associated with radon gas. Well, where is it found? Wherever uranium exists, and that's everywhere, right? It's basically the upper crust, the Earth's surface. So all of our bedrocks are granites, shales, slates, marble, sand, any place where there's rock and soil, it's more than likely going to be some concentration of radon, uranium, I should say. So, and it's not a current, or I shouldn't say, it's not not uniform throughout the surface, right? I could be in this room right now and I could be over a pretty dense concentrated area of uranium, and I could walk 100 feet from here and be in a much less concentrated level of uranium, right? So that's why sometimes we'll test a home and, they'll get a high radon rate and their next door neighbor will get a test done and they have a very low radon rate. And okay, yeah, you ripping us off trying to sell us a radon system? No, that is just the way that uranium exists in our world. This is interesting though, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this. Radon, radon also comes from something called emanation. So when we take all of those natural things, the granites, the marbles, the sands, all that wonderful stuff that naturally will have uranium in it, and we turn those natural products into objects that we bring into our home, we are basically bringing in uranium infused material, which then can emanate radon into our homes. So you can take a home that if you tested it for any furnishings or any finishes were brought in, tested that home, you have a relatively low reading of radon, or you would have a baseline, I should say, a baseline reading of radon. And the family moves in and they bring in stuff. All of a sudden, you go back and test that home again. Radon level has increased. If you look around, they see what's causing that. So things like marble countertops, granite countertops, concrete floor. Concrete's made of sand, right? Sand can have uranium. Plate tile, all concrete countertops. All of that stuff has statues. People will bring in a marble statue. A marble can have uranium in it. There's a pretty sort of famous case here in Nova Scotia of a architect who brought a big piece of granite stone into his home as an architectural feature. Before the home all got framed in, they brought in a crane, dropped this big piece of stone in his home, framed his home all up. A radon test afterwards found the radon was very high. They looked at the granite as being suspect. They covered the granite all over in the tent, put a radon monitor in there and tested, and that one stone was emanating fairly high level of radon. We had to get that stone taken back out. So stuff like that, which we don't really think about, right? Just thinking it's coming up from the ground. Once again, 14 billion years, it's not going to be a problem in your house. It's going to be all good. So obviously it's in all buildings contacting the ground. Typically it will be concentrated at lower levels because as we get closer to the source, even though the radon's potentially being drawn up through the house, as we get closer to the source, closer to that uranium, we're going to have higher concentrations of radon gas. Which is why when we do a test, try to go to the lowest area in the home would be occupied. Occupied simply means when somebody's in there on average longer than 4 hours every day would be considered an occupied level of the home. We want to get as close to the source as we possibly can. Here, if you have high radon in your crawl space, you don't live in your crawl space, right? It's irrelevant. So yeah, so inside all buildings contacting the ground. So basically, if you live in a tree house or a houseboat, you probably do not have a problem with radon. Out in water. So we have a well in a rural area that's been drilled down through bedrock. The bedrock is releasing radon gas into the water. That radon gas will become suspended in solution. It will stay in the water and it's kind of docile. It's not really doing anything that bad. As soon as we open up our taps and the water starts to rush through our pipes and it starts to get agitated, it's out through the aerators in our faucets and our shower heads, and it's being sort of broken up. And that radon gas will come out of suspension, enters the house now, it's radon gas. And there are some wells that have tested very high in our area for radon. Outside in open areas. So if you go in the parking lot today, you're not going to escape it. It's going to be there. It'll be typically at very low concentrations, and any radon that is coming up from the soil that we're standing on gets sort of washed by the wind and the atmosphere around it. But by the time it gets to our face where we're going to potentially inhale it, it's not really of concerning concentrations. Still not great. You don't want to breathe in radon, but it's pretty low outside. It's not too much of a concern. And this is our current map. It was 2024 by the Department of National Resources. This map has changed over time because as Health Canada's understanding of radon increases, they have to come out with new maps to reflect new action limits and safety levels and all that stuff. So, just to kind of show you this here, does this thing work? Oh, it's working right. This is kind of a bird's eye view of Nova Scotia, so you guys know. And we can see here that roughly this is Halifax Harbor. It's interesting because if you look west of Halifax Harbor, there's a real cluster of high radon. So I should clarify this. Dark is high risk radon, brown is moderate risk radon, and then this yellowy color is lower risk radon. Remember, radon, there's no such thing as zero risk radon, right? White that you're seeing are bodies of water. But there's really no place in Nova Scotia that is radon free. So we kind of look there west of Halifax Harbor, get into a pretty large cluster there of high and moderate radon. And that's, downtown Halifax. This is Sambro, Herring Cove, Williamswood, Terrence Bay. We get out through Timberley, Tantallon, Lunenburg, Mahone Bay. All of that area has tested over the years very high radon. East, we get into just a lot more moderate and low. Actually, I don't know if this in the way of the Zoom people, but the very tip, Cape Breton is a high radon area. A lot of times it's where the bedrock comes closer to the surface, we get obviously higher radon testing. So I'll just drill down on that a little bit. Stand over here, hopefully I'm not blocking anything. So yeah, so this is Halifax Harbor here. And then we can see that west of Halifax Harbor out to Lunenburg County and stuff. It's all very high, moderate radon risk. Why is radon bad? Remember, I said that radon is not bad, and technically, radon is not the problem. Okay, radon, this is where we get into when I said talked about something being chemically inert. Radon is chemically inert. It's not electrostatically charged. It doesn't change anything. So if we look at the radon gas that is in our room that we're breathing in, because it's not electrostatically charged or doesn't react with things in the environment around it, we breathe it in and we breathe it right back out before it really has any impact on our health. So that's why I say that radon is not bad. The problem is, for when I talked about uranium, I said uranium's the parent. As it disintegrates or decays, it produces daughters or progeny. And one of those daughters is radon, which is bad. Why? Because when radon gets into our room, now if we look at radon as being the parent, radon now begins to produce progeny. Okay, so now radon is the folks, is the mom and dad having children, they're having daughters. Two of those daughters are what we call the evil polonium twins. We have polonium 214 and 218. Okay, so we have radon in the room, it's decaying, it's producing polonium 214 and 218. I'll just call it polonium from now on. Okay, so what happens? Evil polonium daughters stick to the inner lung tissue. So this is what happens. Polonium 14 and 218 are chemically reactive to stuff. Their parent radon wasn't, but these two daughters are. They are electrostatically charged. So they are floating around in the room, these tiny little radioactive molecules, and the dust in the room is coming along, and it doesn't matter how clean your house is, or the air in your home is full of dust. The little solid dust particle comes floating along. It gets close to a polonium molecule because they're both different charges. Oh, they stick together. They are there forever, and you can never separate. So now we have a radioactive piece of dust In the atomic world, it's very heavy, right? And it's also reactive. It's electrostatically charged. So when we breathe in that dust, which has now been attached to polonium molecule, dust is very heavy because it's electrostatically charged. Oh, it sticks to our lungs. Okay. So in itself, also not the problem. Problem is now you have to look at polonium, which is stuck to the lungs, and you have to look at that as being the parent. Now, polonium is going to begin to disintegrate and produce progeny. We're not going to talk about what progeny that produces. How polonium does that is the problem. So in order for polonium to disintegrate and change, releases something from its nucleus, from its nuclear orbit. That's called an alpha particle. So if you remember from the high school days, we had alpha particles, beta particles, neutron particles, gamma waves. It's all stuff gets ejected, radioactive molecules as it tries to get stable, right? So we have polonium now, which is really down the road, has come from uranium. Uranium, radon gas to polonium, polonium in our lungs, stuck to our lungs. Okay. Now that's disintegrating. And in the process of disintegration, it is firing or ejecting alpha particles out of its nuclear orbit. Alpha particles, think of them as being bullets. They're solid particles that fly out of orbit. Speed of half light year it's half the speed of light. So an alpha particle leaves its nucleus at half the speed of light. Flies out, it hits a lung cell. If it kills the lung cell, it's no problem because the body will just reproduce another lung cell to take its place. The problem is when it damages a lung cell. So if it goes through a lung, this bullet flies through a lung cell, nips the DNA strand of the lung cell. Lung cell has now lost its blueprint, what it is, big it should grow, what shape it should grow. So it just begins, because it's not dead, begins to just grow willy-nilly without a blueprint, and it begins to create other cells in its image. So we get this growth of mutant cells, which, as we know, would become a tumor. A tumor would be cancerous. Okay, another thing that can happen is that bullet can go through a lung cell. Instead of damaging the DNA strand, it can hit another part of the cell, makes the cell unable to detect when a carcinogenic is being brought into the lung. So your lung cells have a certain amount of sort of resistance or immunity, if you will, to certain carcinogens that we breathe in. Once that cell gets damaged, it loses that ability to resist. So now we have lung tissue that is much more susceptible to other things that we're breathing in. And probably the most, probably the most common thing would be cigarette smoke. So if we have somebody that smokes, which, you know, they're already inhaling pretty strong carcinogenic, at the same time they've got damaged lung cells which can't resist carcinogenic. That's where we would see a severe increase in the chance of somebody getting lung cancer. So, any questions at that point? That's I'll keep that as basic as I could. It comes from uranium. It eventually ends up as polonium. It eventually damages your lung cells, and that's where we get our cancers. Thing from our Zoom people. I don't know. I'm supposed to hear like a voice from God or something come out here when he's asking a question, but please ask away. Okay. So what does Health Canada say all about this, right? Radon is the #1 cause of cancer in non-smokers. So if you look at in Canada, if you look at the hierarchy of lung cancer, it is smoking, radon, everything else. We get into, we were talking about this to our people out in Zoom land here. We were having a discussion a little bit about this before I started the course. If you get into a cluster of people you see a lot of lung cancer, and a lot of those people aren't smokers or don't really have sort of an unhealthy lifestyle. Chances are, if you go in and you test their homes, you're going to find out that there's probably a higher level of radon in their homes. Now, radon-induced lung cancer kills 3,500 Canadians a year. But it is the cause of lung cancer diagnosis and thousands more. It kills 3,500 a year. When we talk about measuring radon, we have to have a unit of measurement. We use a unit of measurement called becquerels per cubic meter. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 becquerels per cubic meter until we hit 200. What 200 becquerels per cubic meter is the action limit Health Canada says to have a radon mitigation system in your home. We test a home, determine that it's 250 becquerels. This is the time when homeowner would be encouraged to install a mitigation system. We'll talk about mitigation here. So that's kind of an important thing, really, for me to remember as measurers. That is that action limit of greater than or equal to 200 becquerels per cubic. It's interesting. 37% of homes in Nova Scotia exceed action limit. That's over twice the national average. The national average is about 17% homes across Canada exceed the 200 becquerels. Nova Scotia is 37. As a quick note, 200 becquerels used to be 800. So that was one of the first when we're going to get into a little bit of a history on this in a bit. But when Health Canada kind of first came out with some of their sort of information for the public and stuff, they were basing everything on 800 becquerels per cubic meter. The map was completely different looking. Then they realized 800 is too high. We have to get that level down. And that's why the maps have changed. That's why some of the public outreach has changed. Areas that were considered to be low risk have now bumped up into medium risk, into high risk. So it's just as the information evolves, so does the way we test, and so is the way we teach and mitigate. So the average radon level in Nova Scotia home, 110 becquerels per cubic meter. Right? So the average home in Nova Scotia is almost at the action level of 200 becquerels. Doesn't take much more to get over it. Average outdoor radon level in Nova Scotia is 20 becquerels cubic meter. So sometimes we talk about like how effective is mitigation and how much can we get the radon reading down into a home. We can get it down very well. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Typically, theoretically, you would probably never be able to get a home less than 20 becquerels, because 20 becquerels is the earth around us, and you can't start mitigating the earth. Right? So, but even that would be considered pretty low for a home. Normally, mitigation can get a home down to in the 75 becquerels is kind of what industry kind of strives for. That would be a successful mitigation. We'll talk about that here in a second. There's something very important to remember. We're going to start getting into a little bit of real estate stuff here. No test duration less than 91 days is approved by Health Canada to determine the need for mitigation. Well, I cannot go into a home, monitor that home for less than 91 days and definitively tell the person whether they do or do not need a radon mitigation system. If I did that, I would be liable. I would be doing a major disservice to the home buyer or to the homeowner. I could have a certification script. I could be blacklisted. And, depending on how the real estate, and this is kind of your specialty, it could also open a real estate agent up to liability if claims were made that weren't necessarily accurate. Talk about that. So obviously I can't go into a home, drop a meter in a home for 91 days, hold up a real estate transaction, right? That's just not going to work. So first, our Canadian Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists created a 96-hour radon screen assessment because there were shouldn't necessarily home inspectors. There were radon testers that were going into homes doing 24-hour tests, 48-hour tests, right? Those are a no-no for us as a radon tester when we are doing radon for a real estate transaction. I can quickly run into a home, throw a meter there for 24 hours. It's for the curiosity of the homeowner, but that cannot be applied to any real estate decision. So the 96-hour test is called a radon screen assessment. Highlighted here in orange, yellow, determines mitigation probability. So what I can do after 96 hours, depending on the results I get from the test, I can tell a potential home buyer or a homeowner, based on this test result, there is a probability you will need a system down the line. There's a probability that you won't need a system down the line. It is very accurate. If we do a test, it says there's a high probability of a radon test. There is a real high probability, and I'm not allowed to say a certainty, there is a real high probability that person's home, if I left that meter in that home for a year, 91 days, come up and say the same thing. This house needs radon mitigation. Okay. So we're stacking the dice, for the homeowner or the home buyer to say, okay, here's the probability, here's the chance of me needing a system, here's the chance of me not needing a system. Once again, legally say on a report, this home needs radon mitigation. And we don't want to say that because just think of the trouble we could all get in if we said that, right? And plus, I never want to be an alarmist when it comes to doing home inspections and when it comes to doing radon testing. So you don't want to do something or make some statement that is potentially going to cost a home buyer dream home. It's something that they love this house, and somebody comes in and says something without giving thought or context to it. That person walks away from that sale and they lose that home that they want. That's bad for you guys as real estate agents. For me, that's bad for the seller, that's bad for all parties involved, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to give information to the home buyer so that they can make an educated guess on top of everything else that they got to think about. This is something that just helps them decide. Same as a home inspection. A home inspection doesn't tell the buyer whether they should or shouldn't buy a home. Says, here's what I found, here's what I know, here's all the information now. Put it together, go sit home, have a glass of wine, and think about how you want to proceed with this. Once again, it's designed in response to the time constraints. Real estate transactions, 96 hours. It's closed home test. Means the doors or windows in the home are allowed to be open for 96 hours, with the exception of the door is allowed to be picked as the entrance and exit for the occupants. It's out, close the door, in, close the door. You can't leave the door open. And we have a contract that gets signed and hang some signs around the home explaining what the process is of the test. We are allowed to run heat pumps, mini splits, central heat ducted systems are allowed to run HRVs, heat recovery ventilations are allowed to basically function as normal in their home, with the exception of not use a window mounted air conditioner. Can't use something called a swamp cooler. Swamp cooler is basically a window mounted air conditioner that instead of going out to the window, it goes out through the wall. Because those two devices bring in a massive supply of fresh air that can skew the test really bad. All those other things that we talked about, the HRVs and heat pumps, all that stuff, do not skew the test results.
Wasn't it a heat recovery? Suck air in from the outside?
Yeah. So the reason that we'll allow a heat recovery, because we are trying to determine in the home what the normal day-to-day living conditions are. If I have a heat recovery that's on 24/7, 365 days a year, is normal conditions in that home. That's a good point, though. We get into mitigation here. A heat recovery ventilator be the reason why radon is actually low. We could shut a heat recover ventilator off, come back and test the home, and they could have elevated radon. And when they turn their HRV on, the radon goes down. There's your mitigation system. Where, man, you don't have to buy anything, just keep your HRV running all the time, right? So that is one of the mitigation options for dealing with elevated radon is to install an HRV. Like for instance, a window air conditioner or a swamp cooler, run 365 days a year in Canada. So we have to inject a delay into the machine. This is the machine bug, right? And it's not normally vertical, it's normally horizontal. Basically, when I bring that into your home, that machine has already been in my home for the last little while, or it's been in somebody else's home sitting there, and it is kind of getting contaminated or acclimated to the environment that it's in. So if I bring it into your house and I test it right away, there's going to be several hours where it's still kind of dealing with the last place it was in, right? So we have to bring it into the home, have to give it time to acclimate. CARB says you need to at least have that machine in a home 4 hours before it comes on and starts to test. They recommend 12 hours. So typically, for instance, if I get a call on Friday saying I want a home inspection and a radon test, so I'm going to bundle them up, save a little bit of money. If I'm coming in Friday to do that, perfect world, would get into that house the Monday before the Friday, set the machine all up, program it, get it ready to come on automatically. The time that would allow me to get a full 96 hours of measurements. When I came back on Friday to do the home inspection, after my home inspection, I would collect my radon monitor, go home, bolt the reports up, and then send that information out all in one shot. Yeah.
So it's your 96 hours.
Yep.
Plus the optional 12, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So 108 hours, be optimal. 4 hours is fine, and like I could literally turn this machine on right now, start monitoring. I could come back 2 weeks later, because I can pick within my software any 96-hour period I want to look at, and then I can truncate beginning and the end. I only see a specific 96 hours, so it's pretty adjustable. Okay, so now I've done the test. 96 hours in your home. At my machine, I come back to my office, I Bluetooth that into my software. Software does a bunch of incredible stuff. Basically, what this does in a 96-hour test will take 96 1-hour snapshots in the home. Each snapshot measure humidity, barometric pressure, temperature, and radon concentration. The background running behind all of that, an anti-tampering system. So if the homeowner tries to defeat the system, like opening up a bunch of windows or moving the radon monitor into someplace outside or something like that, I'm going to know because my anti-tampering alert is going to come on. I'll see it in my software. I can look at those specific times and dates that anti-tampering fired off and go over to that hour snapshot when that occurred. I can determine whether or not that was an actual tampering event or was it just something else. So if this was on right now and that's going to give me an anti-tampering alarm. Get the software. It's going to say somebody moved your machine. So, but if I go back and I look at that hour snapshot, and everything's kind of regular to all the other snapshots, I know that wasn't somebody moving that machine. But all of a sudden, if I've got this crazy drop in temperature, this crazy drop in humidity, I know at that very time that alert sounded, I know that somebody's played. Somebody knocked it over, which is fine. I'll call them and say, listen, what's going on there? Yeah, we just knocked it over. We didn't think you'd notice. Okay, so 3 categories. First one, grain. Remember, this is determined by CARS. This is CARS regulations, their suggestions. I'll read it verbatim. If I get a green test, no further action with regard to radon testing is recommended or warranted prior to purchase. I like that because we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so that's a good one. That's the one we want, right? Sort of the middle of the road test is if I get a yellow. Result indicates that there was a higher probability that the annual average radon concentration higher 200 becquerels per cubic meter. This is important. Remediation may be warranted. Purchase negotiations should take the potential cost of mitigation into account. For example, setting funds in escrow. I don't know if that's a real common real estate practice here, but there are places in North America where when someone purchases a home, right away there's $5,000 that gets put into an escrow account, and that stays in that account until the buyer had a chance to do a long-term 91-day radiation radon test. Test comes back that they need a mitigation system. That funds in escrow get released to the buyer. It doesn't need a mitigation system. Those funds in escrow get released back to the seller. Right? I don't know if that's big here or even that's done at all. So really the way we should read into that is consideration should be given to negotiating a price increase. If escrow doesn't exist in the real estate world here. That's the bad one. So this test result indicates a strong probability. And remember what I said before, it is super, super strong without me saying I'm certain. Right? The annual average radon concentration is higher than 200 becquerels per cubic meter, and it's the same exact suggestion. Purchase negotiations should take the cost of mitigation into account, for example, funds and escrow. So when I look at these three, the way I kind of break this down, so there's two no-brainers. There's green and there's red. If it's green, no problem. Away we go, continue on with the sale. If it's red, it's the time when the seller and the agent have to get together and say, I want money taken off us. I'm 99.9% sure down the road I'm going to need a radon mitigation system. I want for the negotiation to reflect that, whatever that choice is. Yellow is kind of that decision time that really is kind of depends on buyer. So if the buyer's like, oh man, I really love this home. I don't want to push the seller off anymore because I've asked for stuff. And I know there's people behind me in the wings that are going to buy this home. Can I walk out of the deal? Might say, well, there's a chance I might not need a mitigation system. So I'm not going to bring it up. I'm just going to purchase the home and away we go. Or they might go, you know what, this isn't my dream home. If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. So yeah, I'll ask for a couple $1,000 off from the seller. And if they don't give it to me, then I'll walk. And so that yellow one is kind of a subjective area. Green and red are pretty, as much as I can say with a 96-hour test, pretty accurate in determining things. Regardless of the test result, this is why I highlighted the green where it says over there prior to purchase. Because regardless of the test result, a long-term 21-day test should be initiated upon possession of the home. Verify actual average annual radon levels. Okay. And that is simple as basically when the homeowner gets in, they don't have to call me back in and go, okay, you did the radon screen assessment. I bought the house. Now I want you to come back, charge me another whatever to come in and do a 91-day. Have to do that. They can simply at that point in time just go either purchase a home radon kit and they can watch that kit for a year. You can buy them, they're disposable, or you can buy real nice ones that kind of look like thermostats on the side of your wall that are continually monitoring radon. So there's home monitoring kits, but to get that initial 96-hour test in to buy a home, they need something like this. Especially it has to have anti-tampering because it's pretty easy to defeat a radon test if you didn't bring in a substantial machine. Even so, if you want to get creative enough, you can default that system. That's why I look at the graphs closely to see if it's all correlating, if there's anything that is suspicious.
What's the average cost of a 96-hour test?
$265. Where's in that area? So triggering mitigation. We're almost at the end here, folks. So one of the big ones is subslab depressurization. That's all homes built after 2010 require that to be installed in the home. And basically, there's a bit more to it than this. When they have the foundation walls done and they're ready to come in and pour the slab, with the gravel and all that stuff, we'll take a perforated pipe. We'll run out through the center, basically go to the center of the slab. Perforated pipe comes along the floor, makes a 90-degree turn up into like a utility room or something like that. It'll be a 4-inch, 4 to 6 inch PVC pipe. We'll have a cap on top of it. What is supposed to say radon. So if you walk into a new home today and you go into their utility room, you're more than likely going to see a pipe coming up out of the floor. It's not going anywhere. Right? That's called a level 1 radon rough-in. And they pour the concrete over that. There's other stuff that's done to make that more effective, but that's the general side of things. That sits there and does nothing until such a time that a radon test, a long-term radon test is completed, determine that they need radon mitigation. We'll then just come cap off that 4-inch pipe, hook an exhaust fan up to it, exhaust that fan out through the side of the house. And when that fan comes on, it creates a negative pressure under the slab. That causes all of that gas to go into that pipe and out the side of the building. It's a very effective way dealing with radon. It's not feasible to do in homes that don't have the rough-in system. Some people still do it, but you're doing some ripping and tearing to get that done. Another one that's very simple or similar to subslab pressurization is submembrane. So in a crawl space or something like that, where people aren't down there all the time, we don't worry about people walking across the floor. We can put a big membrane down across the slab. It gets sealed to the walls, the foundation walls, and under that membrane, that same pipe would have went under the slab. So now there's this perforated pipe between big plastic membrane and the concrete below it. Pipe comes up 90 degrees up the wall into a cap. And if they need it, they turn an exhaust fan on, and just like one of those food saver vacuums, you'll see the plastic all come in tight to the floor and to the pipe. That's removing that gas coming up between the concrete and the plastic. Fill it all out. Fill it all out. If the house already has a sump pit, can utilize that. Build a mechanism over the top of that sump pit. It doesn't create the sump pit. That'll still work as a sump pit. It will create, they'll put a fan and a shroud over that. That will create a central negative pressure point in the house, with the hopes that the radon gas will migrate to that sump pit and then out of the house. Use something called a passive radon stack, which is basically a plumbing stack that you see going through the roof of a home. Comes down to the house. It has to remain on the warm side of the house. Works fairly well in Canada because of our cold climate. So that pipe comes straight down, goes into the slab. It's just a straight run up through the roof. It looks like a plumbing stack coming out of the roof. And basically what happens is the air inside that pipe gets warm. When it gets warm, it rises. And as that warm air is rising, it's drawing in cool air up underneath it. That's creating a centralized negative pressure point under the slab. And that sometimes can work very well, very cheap. Big one is sealing entry roots, so cracks in foundation, stuff like that. If you look at the way a typical foundation is poured, it's a 3-phase thing, right? Pour the footings, come back after the footings have set up, pour the foundation walls, they come back after they have set up, they go in and they pour the slab. So it's not like what's called a mono pour, where everything's poured at once. So what you get, of course, is your foundation wall. As your slab comes into it, there's always a seam between the slab and the wall, right around the whole house or the garage or whatever. That can be sealed up with a caulking. The radon gas, it's not something that can force its way through solid material. It's pretty lazy. It will if it finds cracks. That's how it gets into your house, right? Small enough that it will go through extremely small cracks, but it won't go through solid material. And we talked about this mechanical ventilation and filter. So at the beginning of this little demonstration here or presentation, said that radon is 7 times heavier than air. This is where this helps a little bit. So basically, if you look at that dust particle that was radioactive because it has polonium, that is kind of drifting around. Now it's even heavier, so it begins to sort of settle a little bit. If that gets close, say, to the surface of this table, because it's electrostatically charged, it's going to go, oh, and stick to that table. It's called a plate out. Once it's stuck to that table, it can never come off. It can't be vacuumed off. It can't be washed off, right? It's stuck there for good. That's good, because if it's stuck here, it can't get in here. So that's called plate out. And when we run house air, radon infused house air through an HRV or through a whole home filter, that radon gas is going through the mechanics and the ductwork and everything. It's plating out the filters, it's plating out into the ductwork, and that can be a drastic reduction of radon as well. A lot of it really depends on what the concentration of radon is in a home. If we have super, super high radon in a house, the treatment's going to have to be more aggressive. It's kind of on the edge of being too high. The installation of an HRV or sealing some floor cracks might be the answer, right? Or it could be a combination of a couple of these. This range for radon mitigation is between $2,000 to $4,000 on average. So $3,000 would be average. We're thinking of negotiating. Okay, so this is where it all began, 1990. Scotia did its first radon assessment of 700 homes in Nova Scotia. That's when the action limit was 800 becquerels. 20% of those homes were above 800 becquerels. 2006, 2011, it's the first time the province did sort of organized testing. They decided to test all public buildings in Nova Scotia. So that's when it started to become a little bit more formal. 2009, the Nova Scotia Chief Health Officer begins public outreach to let citizens know that they should start hosting their private residents. 2011, we adapt the 2010 building code that says level 1 radon rough-in systems must be placed into all new home construction in Nova Scotia. 2012, 2016, there's a major geological survey done across Canada. Creates the first radon map in 2013. That has since changed because that map was based on a much higher action limit. It's now it is today. And in 2016, there was a big conference or symposium here in Halifax called Radon Exposure in Nova Scotia, Challenges and Solutions. And the biggest mandate of that was to promote public awareness, outreach, education to the general public about radon. So that's when things started to probably ramp up a little bit here, is around that 2015, 2016. Where we're at today, the 2020s, real estate testing is fairly common, especially in areas where their public outreach has been a little bit greater, like out west, Timberley, Tantallon, those types of places. We get a call for a fair amount of radon testing out there. So we're at the end. A couple questions for you folks. Real estate agents have to disclose radon levels to potential buyers. Thank you. Probably nobody from Zoom here. I hope no one's trying to get a hold of me and can't talk to me because
We know the levels.
So okay. So the seller of the home discloses levels. So you are the buyer's agent.
Oh, and if they,
And you become aware of the radon level in that home.
let's say yes.
Is it any different? Hey, Derek?
I don't. We should, but I don't.
Yeah, I think the same. I think you should, but I don't know.
Yeah. So if this says yes, it's not as hard. Like you're going to jail if you don't do this, right? It is strongly encouraged, and you have legal authority, if you will, or protection. If the level is equal to or over 200 becquerels per cubic meter, and the seller has disclosed that to you, and you are able to, and as a buyer's agent, you're telling your buyer everything about the house anyway. This just helps you decide, okay, 200, I really should, I kind of have to protect it if I do that, decide to disclose that information. So that would be a kind of a rare situation. Just to get you thinking. Radon testing legally required for real estate transactions in Nova Scotia.
I don't think so, no.
Hey, we got to get the voice up there. You're right. It's not, but it's strongly encouraged, and you should recommend home scope inspections. Oh, where did that come from? Shame was promotion. Okay. And then finally, does a home inspector hired by a buyer, that should actually say a radon tester, hired by a buyer, to disclose radon levels to the seller? So I have a oath of confidentiality, if you will, when I go in to do someone's home. I'm not even supposed to give their information to you as their agent without their permission.
However, it could be a health risk. Say that, yes, you have to, especially if you're going to say, I want money off. Disclose it, you should.
Okay, okay. All right. So with everything when it comes to doing home inspections and radon testing, though home inspectors have a oath of confidentiality and a purchase agreement is signed and all that wonderful stuff. To maintain confidentiality, because you would never want a seller to get the report of a home inspection. They could definitely use it to their advantage. If ever I find something that my mind is critically unsafe to the current occupant, I have to divulge that to all parties involved. So it doesn't, so obviously with radon, if it's equal to or greater than 200 becquerels, that's a critical safety issue. If it was something structural, something electrical. I think like 2 weeks ago, I did a home Broadfield and pulled the panel off the cover off the electrical box, and there was 2 neutral wires in there that were cooked. Right? The sheathing was all melted, the wires were melted, the breaker was all cooked. That to me was an immediate concern. So obviously I made that known to my buyer. They never had a buyer's agent representing them. And I also put my pictures from my report I sent to the seller agent. I always do everything with an email, so I've got stuff documented, letting them know the problem and also directing them to notify the seller. That's an issue. I could catch on fire then. But yeah, it's normally found in inspection agreements. No one ever reads them. They just sign them because they want to get their home inspected. Oh, that is the end of our presentation. You guys have any questions for me? Anything from Zoom land out there?
Yes, I have a question regarding bringing in, you mentioned countertops, like granite countertops. Even if they're sealed, are they still emitting radon?
So, yeah, so, and that's a great point. So, I said a little earlier there that radon is not something that's going to penetrate something solid, because it's a fairly lazy gas. It's not under a lot of pressure, but it will find cracks and so forth. So a counter that initially comes in, if it's got a real super thick coating of like an epoxy or a really deep, great, thorough finish, going to certainly reduce that, if not eliminate it, until the time that people start dragging pots across the top of it and cutting stuff on it, putting pots on it, and just over time, that finish will degrade. And that's when we could see emanation from that countertop. So to keep, I suppose if that was an issue for somebody, they could keep reapplying a finish to the countertop. Although I would suggest that a single countertop in a home is probably not going to contain enough uranium content to be the deciding factor whether mitigation is needed in a home. What, like that would just be a very small source of uranium. Whereas the guy that brought the big rock in actually
Yeah,
brought
right.
it. The rock had been any higher, it would have glowed in the dark. But he just picked the absolute wrong rock he could pick to bring in. So hopefully that helps. Anything else?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Like so, and a good instance would this be like same would be a concrete floor in a home, because concrete can emanate radium if it's components of that concrete came from a relatively high uranium source. Concrete gets sealed too, but over time that gets walked on, it gets broken down, it starts to reduce that ability to resist the emanation, and we would see an increase. So yeah, so that actually brings me to a good point. Radon levels can increase in a home. Typically, if you think, okay, I built my home in this spot, my radon levels right now baseline, chances are it's never going to change underneath your house, right? Like you should probably be able to safely assume that if you do nothing to your house and nothing in the area changes around you, your radon level would probably stay way forever, right? But there are things that happen into a home that create increase in radon. Seldom does it create a decrease. Things like excessive water use. So we have a home that's got single person living in it, and a family of 4 moves into it. They're using way more water. That water's coming from a well that is embedded into uranium-based bedrock. All of a sudden, the family's use is going to create an increase in radon in their home. If somebody brings in, like we had said, that stuff that's going to emanate, so they bring in statues, they change their countertops to granite, they, bring in marble tile. That's all stuff that could emanate, sort of smaller quantities of radon. More importantly, if lot beside them is developed and they come in and blast the lot, they crack all the bedrock, and you've created thousands more channels radon to increase. And if that's cracked the bedrock under your home, all of a sudden you can see quite an influx of radon. So we always recommend radon tests are done at a minimum every 2 years, especially if you're seeing lots of construction going around in your neighborhood, for sure. Good question.
Or ceramic tile.
So it
Do you
depends.
think?
Yeah, it depends on the composition. So most of that sort of rock stuff that we bring into our house is going to originate from
Stone.
stone or sand or the earth. It's all coming from the upper crust of the earth. So it all has the potential to contain uranium. Yeah. So it can be like a matter of just small changes, more water being used. I brought in a countertop. I put a marble statue in my living room, and all of a sudden, oh, geez, I got my 2nd-year radon test done. I'm actually at 40 becquerels per cubic meter, but nothing's changed. Why is it? Well, yeah, stuff has changed. You've changed stuff in your home.
How does this relate to condos and apartment buildings? If you're up on the 3rd, 4th, 5th floor, you might.
Yeah, okay. So when we do a radon test, and I said that earlier, we do put the meter in the lowest level in the home where somebody is going to be there at least 4 hours a day. So if I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building, chances are that wouldn't be a great place to test. Oh, I'm on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. I can't call the person on the 1st floor and say, I want to put a meter in your apartment, right? So yeah, so you are right. Typically, the farthest away you get away from the source, the less radon you're going to see. And that's good, because if you live in a higher part of the building or you work in a high-rise skyscraper, you're not going to have probably a radon issue unless there's some mechanical system is accidentally pulling the radon through. I shouldn't say accidentally, because it does happen. A mechanical system that's pulling, say, air out from the lower levels or a parkade or something like that, that's somehow getting mixed up in the breathable air of the home or the building. Yeah, then we can definitely pull radon through a building, right? But yeah, so higher levels typically you're going to see less radon. I get this last mini homes. So if a mini home is dropped on a slab or on a foundation, which a lot of them are, then that has the same exact profile as every other home. We would test that as per normal. It's the kind of the typical mini home setup where it's up on piles underneath it. It's got a skirt around it. That is not as subjective to radon. Less skirt that's around the building is really built well. It's down really tight to the ground. It's insulated on the inside of the skirt. It's really a very airtight skirt. And if that person has radon emanating from the soil underneath them, remember that radon, it needs cracks to get through. So if there's usually a big fabric that's underneath a mini home called belly wrap. That belly wrap is all intact and it's solid. There's no rips and no mice or chewed holes through it. And where the water line comes up through the belly wrap, it's all taped well and everything is sealed really well. Chances are a mini home wouldn't be a problem. I've crawled under some mini homes where all that belly wrap is just pouring down like crazy. And then now we're giving a probability that radon could get up into a mini home. Generally, you don't test a lot of mini homes. I think I've ever tested one, for being honest, but could exist. Yeah. Anything else out there in Zoom land?
I'm not sure if I missed it, but what's the significance of the 91 days? Like why 91 days?
Yeah. So that originated from Karst, who kind of directs Health Canada. It was determined that 91 days will illustrate normal living conditions in a home. So what I mean by that is when we do a 96-hour test, it has to be a closed home test. Everything's shut down. Like hopefully you caught that part of the presentation. If not, let me know and I'll just revamp that, reiterate it. A 91 day, it's not a closed home test, open home. They can leave their windows open. They can run air conditioners. They can do everything because Karst, in their infinite wisdom, has determined that 91 days will illustrate the normal living conditions in a home, would be very concurrent with if we watch the home for a year. 91 days gives us a very good picture of what a year would look like in that home. People opening doors, people opening windows, blah, blah, blah. I should say that Karst also recommends that if a 91-day test is done, it's done in the winter, not the summer. Winter months are always when a home draws up more radon. It's called the stack effect. So as the air in our house warms, it rises to the ceiling, and as it rises to the ceiling, it creates negative pressure underneath it that pulls gas from underneath the slab up into the home. Summertime, you don't have that as much. So yeah, the 91 days is kind of the minimal sort of duration that Health Canada will say that illustrates what a good year would look like in this home. It's the minimum they will allow for a professional to definitively tell somebody that they need to put in a mitigation system.
Great, thank you. That's good.
Swear the voice of God's coming out here. Anything else from anybody?
Hey Ed, here's another voice. Just wondering about like how your conversations are going with homeowners because how it might feel, and I'm just trying to play the bad guy or try to create a scenario of maybe conflict is you have somebody that's owned a home for 25 years and all of a sudden they're being told that this imaginary invisible gas is potentially cancer causing and we're going to have to do a test, and if we find issues that's wrong with it or the test comes back that there's an issue, it's going to cost you a couple $1,000s to fix it. That
Now, are
might
you?
seem kind of odd to some people, and I know it's all a fact, but
Yeah,
some people are a little bit shaken up by that all of
yeah.
a sudden this new thing has kind of hit them, if you know what I'm trying to say, maybe.
Oh, do I ever?
Yeah.
So are you talking like from the standpoint, is this in relation to like a real estate transaction where somebody that's lived in their home for 25 years is now selling it, gets notified of this, or is this just somebody that brings me in to test their home out of curiosity?
I would say more so the selling part, whether they're getting ready to go to market, so maybe you're getting a little ahead of it, which might be the best way to approach this anyway, or maybe they haven't really been prepped for it, and you say, oh well, there's a radon test being done. It's like, oh, well, what's that? And what could happen
Yeah,
there? And next thing you know, the guy says, well, you know what? I'm not interested in any sort of radon test at this house. Or you know what I mean? I'm sure you've had some
yes.
colorful conversations.
Well, so, okay, so that's kind of a threefold thing that we do. So basically doing this, so that real estate agents, when they are asked about radon and all this wonderful new stuff, this imaginary gas and stuff, have a better background knowledge to kind of soften that blow a little bit. But I will say this, and this could be potentially, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but when I give a home inspection report to a potential buyer, and maybe part of that report is also a radon test, buyer is not obligated. So, and then the buyer goes back to the seller and says, "I want $10,000 off this house." Buyer, potential buyer, is not obligated to say why. I don't have to say, "I found this, I found this, I found this." Bear with me for a second, unless it's real critical stuff. So that's one area where buyer doesn't necessarily have to say, well, if the radon test here was 170 becquerels per cubic minute, per cubic meter, they don't have to, that doesn't have to be disclosed because it's not over 200 becquerels per cubic minute, right? As soon as we get to the cubic meter, as soon as it gets over that, we have to let people know. So when all that sort of, is not working or whatever, I'm never an alarmist. It will always, like in my reports to the buyer or to a homeowner that just brings me in for whatever reasons, I'm never an alarmist because radon is relatively quick and cheap fix, right? It doesn't take much for most homes. Some of them are a little bit more aggressive to get the radon levels down. So whenever I submit a report to a buyer, if it's in that red zone, I will give them literature and brochures, and I think most people would most radon testers would do this, but would give them educational material that they can in return give to their seller if they wish to say, this is what's tested, this is what's happened, and here's why I'm concerned, and here's why I'm asking for a reduction in the price. Or remember, if I test the home, it's over 200 becquerels, I am obligated, I'm encouraged to let the seller know. So that's when I would approach the seller with that educational material and say, this is same thing, not being alarmist, do not panic. You've lived in this house for this long, you don't have to get out. Can take the next 6 months to a year to get a long-term test done, to get your mitigation in. If you choose, this is somebody that's not selling their home, right? So they're like, oh my God, I've been living in this for this long. Yeah, but you know what? Your health is great. Don't worry about it right now. There's no one in here diagnosed with lung cancer or anything at this time. Take your time. Here's the educational material for you. Call me if you ever got any questions. And here's some mitigation people that can come in and give you a quote. It's probably going to be $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 to get it done. And sometimes for some people, it's like, have your HRV on. Well, that got installed the house 15 years ago and we built it. We never turned the thing on yet. It's a waste of power, right? Well, let's turn your HRV on back and do another short-term test. See what's happened to your radon. Back and you go, man, your radon's well below 200 becquerels. And they've already, they fixed the problem. So education of the agents, and then not being alarmist, seller or to the buyer, just giving them the information and making yourself available, making myself available for questions. I haven't really had people like super freaked out about stuff. And public education from Health Canada is, which I should say that's actually going to be ramped up soon. There's going to be another campaign coming out to even just address the public more. So hopefully all of that stuff helps. Anything else? It was great. I don't mind hanging around. You guys can leave if you want. You don't got to stay here either, but anybody has any other questions? I'll wait a couple more seconds. Oh yeah, that's obviously my contact information. I would say to anybody that I'm available 24/7, 365 days a year. If you're talking to a buyer or something like that, and they've got questions about radon, just like you just asked, call me. I don't care if it's Christmas morning, call me. It takes me 5 minutes to talk to somebody and usually, talk them off the ledge if they're freaked out about something. And as well, once again, that's my contact information. Feel free to contact me as well. If any of you agents, your home's done, personal home's done, just contact me. Let me know that you were either in this physically here, which shouldn't be too hard for me to track, or you're out there in Zoom land. Let me know you were part of this, and I will give you a fantastic discount on radon testing and home inspections should you need that as well. All right, folks, I think that's it. How did I do? What time is it? Good.
Great, yeah.
Is it informative?
Very.
Great session. Thank you very much. Really
You're welcome.
informative.
Good to hear. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, guys, we'll see you all later. I don't know how to shut that down. So
I'm suggesting. I'm taking some more of these.
Yes.
That was really great. Thank you.
good to hear. Good to hear. That's what I want.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
You're welcome all out there somewhere, wherever you are.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hopefully you have something.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. We're you're just kind of getting into it, man. Feel free to touch base with me whenever. Here to call me countertops.
I read a bunch of that,
Yeah, good, yes, please do, please do.
because that is, it's something that's really important, to have the home inspection, how much does that normally run?
I'm gonna say, like say a typical 1,000 square foot home, probably somewhere in the area of probably 5,600 maybe, something like that.
They tag right on.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
discount.
It does, it's 10 to 15% off if they get it as a bundle. Hello, hello.
Just here to help turn the computer off.
Yes, please do. Give me one of these flyers.
Right? Pretty good, actually.
Just got a receiver somewhere that you plug in?
Yeah, it's this little thing right